silly geese. Quackers, what did you bring us this week? Yeah, ever since Sunrise on the Reaping dropped, I've been seeing this claim make its rounds. I'm gonna go ahead and spoiler alert anyone out there still waiting to watch the movie. We are going to be discussing Sunrise on the Reaping and the rest of the series today. So if you are not ready to get in on that content, maybe catch us in the next video. Now, the belief behind this is that Wiress isn't a real victor because she didn't kill anyone in her games. This is an interesting take, at least from my perspective, because it makes a pretty significant assumption about a lot of the other victors. And personally, I wonder what it means about how we see Wiress and her intelligence and intuition. So today we're gonna take a look at where this take comes from, why it might not work, and what it says about us. Let's get into it. In Sunrise on the Reaping, we learn what happens in Wiress's games. This is how Haymitch describes it. It was an arena full of shiny surfaces, lakes that reflected the sky, clouds that returned the favor, and everywhere, boulders and caves and cliffs overlaid with mirrors. When the tributes were lifted into the arena, they couldn't get their bearings. Every which way they turned, tributes in shimmering tunics stared back at them. A giant silver cornucopia held a bounty of supplies, but even navigating a path to it proved treacherous. A tribute would reach for a weapon and get a handful of air, leap into a clearing and smack into a wall, or dodge an attacker only to run straight into their sword. Most of the tributes went nuts, but not Wiress. She took it all in, then carefully maneuvered away from the cornucopia, somehow finding packs of supplies where none appeared to be. The game makers couldn't even get her sponsor gifts to her. She understood their arena better than they did, and ultimately, this is how she won. It was down to Wiress and the boy from District 6. Wiress finally stood up, revealing herself, and the boy leaped for what he thought was her, cracked his head, and drowned in the lake. Dramatic. At the point where Haymitch is describing Wiress's win to us, he's pretty dismissive of her because he can't fathom how a victor who killed no one could actually help District 12. He saw her as sort of leftovers that were given to District 12 because they didn't have their own mentor. But it's worth remembering that in that moment, he was still dealing with the shock and rage at having lost his only friend in the games, right? Luella had just died right there with him, and he took her body to Snow, and he was probably full of adrenaline and rage and all sorts of emotions around that. So that's what he's carrying into this judgment of Wiress. He later admits, "I shouldn't judge her so harshly. If I could outsmart everybody the way she did without lifting a finger, of course I'd do it." Her victory is no less valid than anyone else's. She's no less a victor than Mags. But the hinge of this take is actually something that Finnick says in Catching Fire. And no one in this arena was a victor by chance, except maybe Peeta. The idea behind this is that because part of the fandom believes that Peeta didn't kill anyone, that his victory is discounted. And because Wiress also didn't directly kill anyone, hers should be discounted. But I would argue that this quote doesn't actually mean what the people that agree with this take think it means. I think if you're here, you, like me, would like to know more about our 75 victors. But we don't actually know how many of the victors win. We know the Capital produced stories for Peeta, Wiress, Finnick, Joanna, Annie, Haymitch, and Peeta and Katniss. And we know sort of the behind-the-scenes victory for Lucy Gray. And here's a quick rundown. We're all talking about the same thing. We have BT, who uses parts from his arena to electrocute 6 kids, which lands him the victory. Finnick was basically kind of hanging out until the sponsor sent him a trident, and then he wraps up his games. Annie sees her district partner beheaded, I think, and then is so traumatized that she sort of loses it and ultimately wins because she's the strongest swimmer when there's a flood in their arena. Joanna pretends to be a coward and a weakling until she gets into the arena, and then she ruthlessly murders people. Haymitch kills people mostly when he's threatened, sort of based on instinct. Yeah. He's not going around hunting people. We all know that Peeta and Katniss win their games with the berry trick. Katniss, before her victory, kills a few people, right? She kills both of the kids from District 1. The first one with the tracker checker hive, and then the other with an arrow. And then she also kills Kato at the end in a sort of mercy killing because he's being eaten by the mutts. So her kills are mostly in defense and or in mercy. Same is true in Catching Fire. She kills in defense. And Peeta's kill count is debated within the fandom. Some people believe that he's killed no one. Others believe that that girl who started the fire that didn't die when Kato attacked her and Peeta goes back to check on her. Some people believe that he killed her and some don't. That's not the point of this video. I just want to acknowledge that that's part of the conversation we're having, is that debate is ongoing. But the victor who is probably most similar to Wyrus, at least from the perspective of the audience, is Lucy Gray. Before I get into the explanation, I want to remind us collectively that we have extremely privileged information, right? Because we're inside Snow's head. We know that Lucy Gray has poison. The audience probably wouldn't know that, right? So from their perspective, they're seeing a Lucy Gray that hides out in the wreckage of the newly blown up arena. She comes out a few times to get food and water to run away from Jessup when he is on his rabid rampage. And then when she comes back out to wrap up the games. She's a little different from Wyrus in that she uses a snake to attack Treach when he is trying to kill her, but that's more her using the arena or using the mutts to attack him than her actually directly killing him herself. And then finally we see Reaper die, and the perspective that the audience would have is that Reaper probably died from heat stroke because Lucky Flickerman actually points out that he is exhibiting symptoms of a heat stroke before he drinks the poisoned puddle, or drinks from the poisoned puddle that ultimately ends up killing him. The audience does not know that that puddle was poisoned. They don't know that Lucy Gray has any poison at all, so they don't know about, I think, Wovie dies from her poison. They don't know that. From an audience perspective, their victory actually looks quite similar. And now that we've talked about the list of victors whose victory we actually know, we can see that there are a variety of ways to win the games. It is not required for you to go around murdering people. You really just have to survive. And this list of victors and how they won their games actually shows that there isn't really a correct way to win. And these are just the ones we know about. Katniss also makes us aware that there are less combative games, more like boring scenarios. Let's take a look at those real quick. They tossed everybody into a landscape of nothing but boulders and sand and scruffy bushes. I particularly hated that year. Many contestants were bitten by venomous snakes or went insane from thirst. We spent one Hunger Games watching the players freeze to death at night. You could hardly see them because they were just huddled in balls and had no food for fires or torches or anything. It was considered very anticlimactic in the capital. We don't hear about those victors. We have no idea who they are or what years those games took place. We only hear that when a games is dull, the game makers are expected to make adjustments so that future games are more interesting. The quality of the violence is a measure of the games. not a measure of the victor. And if we accept that as true, then what does Finnick mean by this quote? And no one in this arena was a victor by chance, except maybe Peeta. To answer that question, we have to look specifically at Peeta and his approach to the 74th games. Peeta should have died in the 74th games. He went into them expecting to die. Check out our video on Peeta's approach to the 74th games because it gets more in detail on this, but the point is that he didn't plan to win, and when Katniss finally joins him, he's on death's doorstep. He is clearly about to die, and he only survives because Katniss is able to treat his infection by going to the feast, risking her life, and getting this miraculous capital-made medicine. Then, as the games end, he's bleeding out from another injury, but then the game makers change the rules again, right? They say that only one of them can win, and Peeta insists that Katniss take the win. He's going to die either way. It's a mercy. And, of course, she refuses and pulls out the berries instead, and they win together. I believe that that statement from Finnick is actually just about Peeta's approach to the 74th games. Unlike what we see from practically any other victor, Peeta goes in planning to die. Before they even enter the arena, Peeta says to Katniss, "I've never been a contender in these games anyway." Not in a self-pitying way, he genuinely believes that he is not a contender to win, because he always sort of expected that she would make it home instead. We see this happen again in the 75th games, where he is repeatedly trying to convince Katniss to try to live. He is trying to convince her using the locket and every form of manipulation he can manage to convince her that she needs to go home and be with her family. Every other victor that we know of planned to try to live, including Wiress. I feel the need to point this out because I simply cannot resist, but I would argue that Haymitch also didn't plan to live, and that's why he made the choices that he made in the arena, but Finnick likely doesn't know about that because the way that his games are presented from the capital version of the Quarter Quell is that he planned to survive. So I'm gonna go with Finnick doesn't know that Haymitch planned to die. We're just gonna put a pin in that for now. So back to Wiress. Why do we question her victory? Wiress's legibility problem. Whether your first impression of Wiress is in Catching Fire or in Sunrise on the Reaping, one of the most striking things about her is that she's a little odd. This is how Katniss describes her in Catching Fire. Wiress is probably around my mother's age and speaks in a quiet, intelligent voice. But right away I notice she has a habit of dropping off her words in mid-sentence, as if she's forgotten you're there. And years earlier, before she was tortured in a way that caused her to have these issues finishing her sentences, we know that Haymitch describes her as, quote, unnerving. And somewhere between the two, we know that Joanna gave her the nickname Nuts. Despite her off-putting characteristics, we are repeatedly shown just how brilliant Wiress is. Like BT, she's an inventor. She was able to navigate an impossible arena. She's the one who drops the knowledge that the arena for the 75th games, the third Quarter Quell, is a clock. And when Peeta praises her for recognizing that, he says, "You were very smart to figure that out, Wiress." "Oh, she's more than smart," says BT. "She's intuitive. She can sense things before anyone else." It is interesting that BT, the character known to be so brilliant that his life is repeatedly spared, it's interesting that he's the one that recognizes that what Wiress is able to do is more than just intelligent. It's interesting that he's the one that recognizes that her ability to sense things before anyone else is her brilliance. Even so, we know that the majority of characters don't really see her that way. I mean, Joanna spends the first part of the 75th games dismissing her warnings, the tick-tock and hickory-dickory-dock singing, as her being in shock. I do have a theory about other interpretations of those events, but that's a story for another time. This is Haymitch's first impression of Wiress before he even gets the chance to meet her, when he sees her in the coverage of her games. You wanted to cheer for her, given that she'd outsmarted the game makers, but she was just too unnerving. Why does this matter? The idea that Wiress is less of a victor because she doesn't go around killing people is something that we project onto her. Like Haymitch in his moment of rage, we're expecting her to conform to the violence that the capital demands as sport. But in holding her to that expectation, we're ignoring her greatest asset, her intuition. After her games, when she's interviewed, they ask her about her strategy for surviving the games, and she literally just says, "I followed the light beams." Her inability or disinterest in elaborating made people uncomfortable. But why? Potentially because we tend to assume that anything that cannot or is not explained is just a guess or a feeling and therefore less valid. Back to the take, Wiress is not a real victor. It's a foul for me. Her body count is irrelevant. She didn't win by chance. She was the last one alive in her arena. She just followed her intuition to survive. The discussion about whether or not Wiress is a real victor came down to her body count. But the real measure of a victor is their survival. That said, it's worth considering why we privilege brilliance primarily when it's easy for us to understand. It's something legible. Wiress doesn't really explain herself, and after her torture, she often can't. And because of that, it's easier to dismiss what she does as luck or instinct or just a feeling. And that's not just something we do to her. It's a standard we apply everywhere, including to ourselves. If we can't explain it, then we have a tendency to dismiss it. And that's worth looking at. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a silly goose. Quackers?